If you two ever bother me again the rest of my life, I ain't giving up that stuff. I can't. There's good friends of mine out on the place. Well, he's the boss, we'll have to do his stuff. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the money is. The boss means that the boss is your boss.
To Mob Talk Radio. Now, we are going to get into a new segment called War of the Godfathers. And this entire segment isn't very long, okay? But it's definitely an interesting look. And I'm going to ask all of you to participate in this as well. And after this, I want to know where you would rank these men. And originally, this was going to be like a live show idea, and we may still do it that way. But for now, I wanted to take 10 guys and put them up against one another. And there is a ton of history here. And, you know, because there's a ton of history, I don't want to dive into their entire history because it would be just one giant regurgitation. However, because we have some new people, I might have to jump back just a tiny bit. And so we're going to start with the basic byline here. We define prestige as power, the lack of being in prison, trend setting, and business acumen. And these are in no particular order right now. But in the end, I'm going to rank them by the following sort of things: wealth, prestige, prison time, longevity, and street acumen. And your numbers may be different than mine. So what we are going to do is talk about 10 guys and give you some stats and then come back and rank them in the order in which I think is likely the most accurate. So here we go. Carlo Gambino, family, Gambino crime family. Hits, 3 that we know of in Sicily, unknown in New York City. Net worth, $350 million. Prestige, 5 out of 5. And known for being the boss of bosses from 1957 to 1976. His longevity was 19 years as boss. And what we know about Carlo is that he immigrates to New York City and essentially hits the streets running. He gets into bootlegging and more, and begins to make his way up the ladder. And one of the problems that he's going to face is an overbearing Albert Anastasia. And being the relatively sort of the same age as Anastasia, the idea of him taking over the throne naturally is probably not going to happen. And what makes Carlo different than many others is his scheming, the way he plots, the way he devises plans. Not only has to pick a side in those early days in the Castellano War, but he's going to have to placate his boss and other people in the mafia, including Joe Gallo. And he's the guy who's holding the reins during some of the mob's most infamous moments in history. From the streets to controlling the eastern seaboard, his plotting, his scheming likely is the most Machiavellian moves we've ever seen in Cosa Nostra history. He did not read the playbook, he invented it. Guy number 2, Salvatore Lucky Luciano. Family Luciano Genovese crime family. Hits, 2 that we know of. Net worth, $16 million. Prestige, 4 out of 5. Known for reorganizing the mafia and being the godfather of organized crime in America. Longevity, 15 years as boss. Now, Luciano is known as being the godfather of American organized crime, and Luciano was an enigma, a plotter, a planner, a schemer. And he was just as deadly as the rest of the guys on the streets, but he carried his swagger very differently than his counterparts. He was able to ascend the throne by proxy, by scheming, but also instilled a virtue that was completely the polar opposite of those before him. Old Sicilian ways were out the door, adding a new wave of gangster. He was about money and about business and not about ethnic lines. Everything the mob wanted to be could not be done without Luciano steering the ship. And while Luciano would have similar trappings as other bosses did, the evolution of the mafia couldn't have been possible without Luciano. He changed the way the game got played. John Gotti, Gambino crime family, hits, 1 known, 5 conspiracies to murder, net worth $35 million, prestige 0 out of 5. Known for the Castellano hit and his swagger, longevity 6 years as a boss. And John Gotti was a lot of things. Brash, violent, enigmatic, and he became much like Al Capone, the most recognized mob figure in American history. But what Gotti truly lacked was the ability to keep himself in check. He made mistakes like so many others before him and even after him. And he will not be remembered for his intelligence as much as the entire in-your-face, I am who I am, so do something about it type of character. But his strong suit was understanding street politics and understanding how to deploy a force in the right direction. And this is where Gotti truly excelled, putting the right men in the right place for maximum financial windfalls. But it's that same strong point that took him off the streets 6 years in. Vinny the Chin Gigante family, Genovese crime family, hits 0 out of 1, attempted botched hits. Net worth $400 million. Prestige 4 out of 5. Known for walking down Houston Street in a bathrobe, muttering incoherently to himself. Longevity 26 years as a boss. Now, some of you may say, why didn't you include Patriarca? Why didn't you include? I just went with 10. Okay. So Vinny Gigante, former boxer turned hitman turned boss of the Genovese crime family. In all reality, the botched hit on Frank Costello should have gotten him killed. But somehow he manages to survive that. Shortly after, he gets hit with narcotics charges, which should have buried him, but Vinny played the cards, and he kept winning when the hand meant the most. And the knock on him is his crazy nut job act. Too many idiots on social media think that somehow degrades him as a boss and a man, and it's quite the opposite. In reality, it made him stronger, but morons are going to be morons, you know what I mean? Gigante learned it's better being heard than to be seen. And he was able to lead his family almost unimpeded for 30 years while playing the role of a fucking nut. And he was able to keep his ego in check and watch the likes of John Gotti and Joe Massino bury themselves while silently pushing the right coins into the slot. He didn't have to budge because he was smart enough to let others bury themselves. One of, if not one of the strongest bosses the Genovese crime family ever had or will have. Name Anthony Salerno. Genovese crime family hits, 1 conspiracy to commit murder that we know of, but we also know he ordered the death of everybody in the Westies. Net worth, $2 billion. Prestige, 5 out of 5. Known for being a numbers juggernaut and a construction monster. Longevity, 5 years as a front boss. And it doesn't really get much better than Tony Salerno, a guy who not just absorbed Harlem rackets, but controlled the African-American rackets as well. He and Luciano would employ black numbers runners because Tony Salerno was colorblind. He didn't see white and black. He just saw money. And he built most of his empire without having to bat an eyebrow. He single-handedly revolutionized the concrete industry in New York City and single-handedly killed off the entire fucking Spillane Mafia in 6 months. Power negotiator, slow to rage, and as business was always his first thought. Of all the mobsters we've ever talked about, he is one of the most intelligent gangsters to ever have lived. He knew how to control the flow of business, and he made money off of money. He knew how to legitimize his money into wealthy legal businesses, making him one of the wealthiest gangsters who ever took a breath. He also has a distinguished record of getting hammered with 100 years for a title he didn't own, and he didn't utter a word, except for telling a reporter to go fuck himself. He was invaluable to the Genovese crime family and invaluable to Vinny Gigante. Tommy Lucchese, the Reina Gagliano Lucchese crime family. Hits between 4 and 30. We just aren't sure. Net worth, $350 million. Prestige, 5 out of 5. Known for a co-founding father of the mafia and airport control. Longevity, 16 years as a boss. And this is the one guy who never gets credit. Not only did he not save the life of Gambino and Luciano and others, but he revolutionized smuggling, hijackings, and airport control. He's able to learn from his predecessors how to control the unions and how to expand outside of the traditional turf and how to make millions doing it. He was a guy whose loyalty was unwavering and silently sat back, pulling strings and the chairs from underneath those who fell asleep at the wheel. He's largely responsible for Carlo Gambino's rise. For without Tommy Lucchese, Carlo Gambino was dead way before he ever hits his prime. He was the guy who would be the counterweight on the commission without having to be a prick about it. He had no qualms about working with other families, whereas many other bosses just refused. The reality is, without Tommy Lucchese, I don't know if Luciano even ever becomes who he becomes, let alone Carlo Gambino. Frank Costello, Luciano Genovese crime family. Murders that we know of, too. Worth $1 billion. Prestige, 5 out of 5. Known for being the prime minister, political juggernaut. Longevity, 19 years as the front boss. 19 years as front boss, then actual boss of the crime family. And Costello's always going to be that one guy who could end a beef without a gunshot. He was a debater, a consigliere in every facet of his life. While in his younger days, his reaction was to kill and be violent. As he aged, he learned that business was much better when everybody got what they deserved. He was a negotiator, and without hesitation, his strong ability was to woo politicians, to make deals, and to keep things quiet for the mob. That was something that no other mobster before or since had the capability to do. Costello was able to insulate himself enough to encroach into another society where mobsters before couldn't be inclusive to, and that was to the wealthy and the politically influential. Costello was able to keep the mob in the grace of the government for a long time. His early days of rum running, his political ties, and his friendship with the Kennedys helped the mob and every other mob family make billions. And it was Costello who saw drugs at the end of the mafia, as the end of the mafia, and for good reason. He was making millions of dollars for everybody without having to sell drugs, and never understood why guys couldn't be inventive enough to make money, which is the full reason, among other reasons, why the mob got tired of him. The second his political clout or his ability to silence judges and politicians ended, that was it. It was lights out for him. But without Costello, many of those around him and that came behind him would have never reached the pinnacle without him being there. But at the same time, there is a large hypocrisy. He made millions bootlegging and selling drugs himself. But we've seen that in the mob consistently. Meyer Lansky, Jewish mob. Hits not known. Net worth $600 million. Prestige 5 out of 5. Known for being the mob's accountant. Longevity 40 years. And he's another one who seems to get bypassed. He invented casinos. He invented the scam. He invented diversifying one's portfolio. He taught the mafia how to launder money and taught them how to make money illegally and turn it into a legitimate profit. His ability to play both sides of the coin so that everybody felt like they won was an ability that I don't think a lot of other guys in the mafia ever had. And without Meyer Lansky, the mafia never gets into Cuba, never gets into offshore gambling, never consolidates legit enterprises. Vegas never happens. Cuba never happens. The Caribbean never happens. Luciano never gets out of prison. And the list just goes on and on and on. And Lansky was the mob's accountant, the mob's money czar. Without him, forget it. The mob, I don't think, ever gets past the 1970s. Lansky, in my opinion, was the co-godfather of the American organized crime outfit. And Luciano had the schemes, but Lansky had the answers. And then some. Paul Castellano, Gambino crime family. Hits 0, but ordered some 24. Net worth $25 million. Prestige 2 out of 5. Known for being a chicken magnet. Longevity, 9 years as boss. Gangster to business magnate. Castellano in his early days was a shooter, and he was a guy who kept his mouth shut. What Castellano was able to do was almost completely legitimize the Gambino crime family in terms of his own rackets. And what I mean is he made himself almost completely legitimate. And what people forget is he was also incredibly fucking violent. He killed more people than most would ever believe. But his financial windfall created a persona that a mob boss didn't need to have. Rather than see himself in the mirror for what he really was, he began to see himself on the level as other magnates, forgetting that he was the boss of a criminal organization. He was able to infiltrate the market on poultry, controlling everything in this city. You either bought with Paul Dial, which was Dial Foods, or you were killed. And he also expanded into construction like no other boss in the history of organized crime, other than, say, Tony Salerno. He also expanded, I just read that. The mafia always had a small part to play in the unions historically, but nobody before Paul controlled companies that controlled those unions who controlled the prices. He innovated that. And since then, the mob has taken millions and millions of dollars as a result. However, with Paul Castellano, greed would get the best of him, like others. He remembered that he was a gangster too late in the game, and not keeping tabs on his own family's murders and treachery, and relying on other people to oversee those business dealings, not only takes away his crown, but it also ends his life. Joe Bonanno crime family, ordered some 24 hits, net worth $475 million, prestige 1 out of 5, known for being, you know what I did? I totally fucking did not do this the right way. Joe Bonanno was known for being an originator of the commission and et cetera, even though technically he wasn't. But he was a guy who also legitimized money too. And he was a boss for 30 some years. And so there's so much that I can say. He was a rat. He was a big mouth. He was a liar. He was a narcissist. Even from day one, going back to the Castellano Wars, Joe Bonanno played sides against each other. Joe always seemed to back the wrong horse at every turn, which only proves that he wasn't as smart as he said he was, or as much as he would have you believe. He tried to manipulate everybody and was loyal to nobody but himself, which would lead his family into a bunch of different wars, which only proved that Joe Bonanno being universally disliked was a common theme. And what Bonanno could have accomplished had his ego allowed for that, he would have tripled what any other boss in organized crime history could have ever done. But like I said, his ego wouldn't allow for patience. However, Joe was really the innovator of the narcotics distribution. That was truly his calling, in pushing his turf into areas that many other bosses had never even thought of, or had the power or balls to do. He controlled the mafia in another country while other bosses twiddled their thumbs. And that's one thing that I will never take away from Joe Bonanno, is that he was no dummy. He was brazen. He had balls, but he was almost blindly brazen. He didn't think 2 steps ahead. Had he done that, he might have kept him in the mob and at the top. And his way of counterbalancing power was attempt to subterfuge onto others within the mob. And while that is somewhat Machiavellian, it never worked, because out of the gate, nobody liked or trusted him. He ran when shit hit the fan, and he left his bumbling son to get shot at 6 days a week. That is not integrity. That is not honor. That's cowardice. And cowardice is what defines and what defined who Joe Bonanno was. And that's the truth. So these are the 10 names we have: Carlo Gambino, Lucky Luciano, John Gotti, Vinny Gigante, Tony Salerno, Tommy Lucchese, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Paul Castellano, and Joe Bonanno. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so there's 10. This is the way that I ranked them. And I ranked them with everything sort of compiled into one: prestige, honor, loyalty, jail time, money, longevity. And this is my 1 through 10, 1 representing the best of the best. So after I get done reading the numbers here, I want you guys to reach out, mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com. Give me your rank. Once again, the names are Carlo Gambino, Lucky Luciano, John Gotti, Vincent Gigante, Tony Salerno, Tommy Lucchese, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Paul Castellano, and Joe Bonanno. And I could do another 10 next week. We may just keep this going. This is kind of a fun thing to do. So these are how I rank them in order with everything we just talked about. My number 1 is Lucky Luciano. My number 2 is Meyer Lansky. My number 3 is Carlo Gambino. My number 4 is Tommy Lucchese. My number 5 is Frank Costello. My number 6 is Tony Salerno. My number 7 is Joe Bonanno. My number 8 is Paul Castellano. My number 9 is Vinny Gigante. And my number 10 is John Gotti. Now, some of you are going to say, how the hell could you put Vinny Gigante at number 9? A lot of it is the botched hit, the prestige, and I just feel like, what Paul Castellano was able to do to innovate a market puts him a little higher than Vinny Gigante. Of the two of them, I like Gigante better, right? But Paul Castellano was able to innovate a lot of different things. Joe Bonanno, even in the early days, was an innovator of the drug markets, which makes him very important to the mafia. And that's not to say that Vinny Gigante should be like the bottom of this list. But when you're comparing it with everything that we just talked about in the ranking order, that's where he needs to be. And number 10, John Gotti. Hands down, that's where Gotti needs to be. The last of the list. Based on all the prerequisites, wealth, prestige, prison time, longevity in the streets. Longevity is a big thing. Now, if I had included Patriarcha on this list, he would have wiped the floor with probably 3 of these guys based on longevity, prison sentences, and more. But then there's a negative side to Patriarcha too, because of the rats and the infighting and stuff like that. So your number system may be a little different than mine. But like I said, I have to you can't compare Vinny Gigante financially to a Tony Salerno. You cannot even compare Vinny Gigante to Castellano. Gigante was a better boss. 100%. Make no mistake about it. He had a longer tenure, but because Castellano was an innovator in certain things, puts him a little higher up on that list. Like I said, this is not a popularity contest. This is based on a lot of different variables. So once again, here are the 10 names, and this is my ranking. Carlo Gambino, Lucky Luciano, John Gotti, Vinny Gigante, Tony Salerno, Tommy Lucchese, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Paul Castellano, and Joe Bonanno. And we will do another one of these this week because this is kind of fun. So here is my ranking order 1 through 10. Lucky Luciano, number 1. Number 2, Meyer Lansky. Number 3, Carlo Gambino. Number 4, Tommy Lucchese. Number 5, Frank Costello. And Costello's there because of the political shit. Tony Salerno, number 6. Number 7 is Joe Bonanno. Number 8 is Paul Castellano. Number 9 is Vincent Gigante. And number 10 is John Gotti. Now, would these numbers stack up against other bosses? Well, of course they would. But these were the 10 that I wanted to compare. So if I was going to take the top 5 out of the 10, we would go Luciano, Lansky, Gambino, Lucchese, and Costello. And everybody else would be pushed aside, and those 5 would move on to the next round. And that's kind of the way I think I'm going to try to do this. So out of 10 names, 5 move on. And those would be my 5. Luciano, Lansky, Gambino, Lucchese, and Costello. And then they would face another 5 bosses, so including Accardo and some of these other guys. So that's the way I'm probably going to do this. So write your notes down. Gambino, Luciano, Gotti, Gigante, Salerno, Lucchese, Costello, Lansky, Castellano, and Bonanno. Write your own numbers to them. And next week, we're going to take the top 5. And here are my top 5. Luciano, Lansky, Gambino, Lucchese, and Costello. And those 5 are going to face off against another. What we'll do is next week, we'll do another 10 names. And the winner of those, the 5 top of those names, will face off against these 5 top names, and then we'll rank them in the order of by that criteria. So if this interests you, do me a favor. Reach out to me, mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com. Let me know what you think of this segment. I think it's very interesting because You can now take 10 new names, Accardo, Rica, Giancana. We can take a whole nother 10 names, and out of those 10, another 5 are going to win. Then you post those 5 versus this 5. It's going to be an interesting battle. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? So I'm enjoying this. I think it's a great segment. Let me know what you think. And with all that being said, have a great weekend. We're going to get out of here. I didn't play enough. I didn't download enough songs because I had too many segments. So we're going to go out of here with the Mob Talk Radio theme. In the meantime, if this really interests you, please reach out to me. This might even be a good show to do live. I think it's very interesting looking at sort of these characters. But let me know what your opinion is. With all that being said, have a great weekend, and we'll see everybody back here next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.